The World Robot Conference is currently underway in Beijing. It comes as analysts say that China is overtaking the U.S. in the robotics race, particularly when it comes to humanoid robots. Beijing has made developing robot technology part of its national strategy, investing billions of dollars. In the past year, Chinese humanoids have danced in Lunar New Year celebrations, run the Beijing half marathon, and faced off in their first ever kickboxing competition. Peter O'Brien has more.
They're fighting, dancing, chatting, soothing, and generally showing off, albeit somewhat clumsily. This week's World Robot Conference in Beijing is just one of a flood of events hammering home the message that when it comes to robotics, China's number one.
The Chinese government attaches great importance to the development of the robot industry. In the first half of this year, the operating revenue of the robot industry increased 27.8% year-on-year.
Chinese media are vaunting a series of world firsts. This week also saw the opening of a robot dealership in Beijing, offering sales, spare parts and maintenance. Before that, we had the first robot marathon runners. And teams are training hard for the inaugural World Humanoid Robot Games next week. Androids are expected to become much more useful, particularly given advances in AI. And by all accounts, China is already well ahead.
I think robots have a greater range of applications in China. They become practical quicker, and the market in China is bigger. The innovation is more comprehensive.
American tech giants Nvidia and Tesla are making moves in the sector, but Chinese firms can develop robots more cheaply thanks to government support, massive investment and manufacturing know-how. For foreign sales, Europe is a particular focus, with the US coming down harder on Chinese tech imports in recent years. Congress has warned that Unitree, the company behind these boxing robots, could use their remote access features to spy or cause disruption.
Well, for some analysis, we can bring in Reyk Knuhtsen, an analyst specializing in robotics with independent research company SemiAnalysis. Good morning. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
Now, watching that report, humanoid robots are definitely fun to see, but how valuable are they really? I mean, what are their real-world applications?
Yeah, of course. So we've developed a framework to kind of evaluate these systems. At the moment, many people are kind of stuck in thinking that when they think about robots, they might think of the industrial robot, where it can't plan too much. Maybe it assembles a car in some way, or it lifts heavy machinery. But in reality, these robots don't plan or adapt or adjust. If anything changes in the task, it kind of breaks the process flow or it freezes. What's interesting about humanoids is that we now have robots that are capable of genuine planning and interacting with the environment, right? So if you give it the task of maybe, say, clean the room, it can identify this piece of trash on the ground, walk over toward it, and figure out how to pick up the piece of trash. And so this kind of lends itself to a lot of applications, and we're seeing this happen kind of all over the world right now in very early pilot stages, where the robots might be moving boxes in factories or might be just handling equipment or processing things. And it's very early on, but this conference will be interesting because it will demonstrate where China exactly is at in this regard, how far they've come in this space, and what's to kind of come out of the country still, because we know they're very good at the hardware side, but the AI side is still a bit lacking in the country is what we feel.
And can you talk more about what's at stake in this robotics race between the US and China? I mean, is it more about having the technology for each country's sort of personal use, or is it really about dominating the market?
It depends. So in the kind of outcome of things, this may end up as a dominating the market. We do believe that this current robotics paradigm, in which you supply the robot with enough data to perform many different tasks and they can reason and plan, in this current paradigm, you see what's called like general purpose robotics, in which theoretically, with enough data, and this is what the humanoids are kind of demonstrating, if you have a robot capable of performing multiple tasks, you can kind of have them automate quite a bit of labor. And the worrying part becomes when you see these costs on these robots, and maybe people rent them out as a service or people lease them out for very cheap, and sometimes it can be cheaper than human labor. You start to create a new labor force with these robotics. And so being able to be at the forefront of this, being able to be the kind of dominating force in these robotics will spell out quite a strong case for the country's labor economy, and especially exporting labor into other countries, maybe, or even within the country, automating jobs much faster. So they may become even quicker with producing cars, or they may be quicker with producing even more robots. Things will become cheaper. They will become faster. They will reach production capacities that are immense at the scale that we haven't quite seen before. And so there's a lot at stake here. It is very early, so it may seem a bit questionable how much really is on the table here or how much these humanoids are capable of. But there is a strong potential for this to work out, and we believe that this will work out in some robotics companies' favors, and we're excited to see where this goes.
What you describe is a potentially devastating change to the labor market for a lot of humans. I know you say that it's early, but can you give kind of a sense of a timeline for when some of these changes might happen and jobs would be lost?
Yeah. I mean, I can't totally speak to the timeline as to when jobs will be lost, but I can speak to what's happening right now. So at the moment, we've spoken to a few companies who are doing these pilot tests in the factories or warehouses or even restaurants where the robots are cooking. They are showing promise right now, but we can't fully say they're reliable. So the challenge with robotics is that in order for the robot to be viable, it needs to justify its cost, right? It needs to be worth it. Maybe it's not fast enough, or maybe it messes up just enough of the time where a human has to intervene and you don't actually replace any labor, or you don't actually have this task totally automated, but rather if they're not reliable enough, it may even become kind of a nuisance where you kind of have to keep checking in on this robot. It might just be better to have a human do it. But this is where we're at currently, is where people are gauging to see how reliable they can be, if it's worth it to actually employ these robots in these positions. And we think early promise, but early, right? So this may take maybe a few years before you see larger scale implementation of these systems. It could take longer. I'm not in the business of forecasting this too much. However, we do believe that as data continues to grow in these tasks, and as more robots are deployed and more data is collected, you kind of generate a flywheel in which data continues to come in, robots continue learning, more of them start to go out and generate more data, and it just kind of scales upward. And so we believe this will begin to take place pretty soon. And you might see the robot learning really exponentiate in near time.
Where is the United States at in terms of its national strategy? Is robotics something that's on Donald Trump's list of priorities right now?
So it's difficult in the US. I believe there's quite a few initiatives that are trying to push into robotics. However, it's not fully fledged yet. And I think many are many are misunderstanding how challenging this is. So robotics are still a manufactured good, which means you need a full supply chain, you need the relevant facilities to build out these robots, and you need the general capabilities or materials to do so. At the moment in the US, we are lacking in these. We still source many things from China. We still build most of our things outside of the US. Some stuff is assembled in the US. However, there needs to be a bit of a stronger initiative in the US. There's a few associations that are pushing this. There may be like a need for an industrial policy of sorts, but something does need to happen because we are quite a bit behind in our capacity to produce these robots, especially at a reasonable price. I'm sure this comes up quite a bit when people consider the Chinese robots, where Unitree can put out the robot for $6,000. And this kind of blows everyone away. And to be fair, it is incredible that they can put it out for $6,000. This is not the case in the US. These robots will be much, much more expensive. And this will be a problem in the justification of the cost issue that I talked about earlier, where they may not be very viable if they're far too expensive, or you may have to go for niche markets. But in any case, there's still a challenge in being able to produce these robots in the US.
It's a very sci-fi future, I think, for many of us, but sounds like it's becoming more and more of a possibility. Reyk Knuhtsen, thank you again so much for joining us to talk about robots this morning. That's Reyk Knuhtsen, an analyst specializing in robotics with independent research company SemiAnalysis.